Hey, it's Pierre. I got a question recently that I've gotten before, and I thought I would try to answer in a video so that I can point people to it. And the question was, what is the best squash racket on the market? That's a difficult question to answer, and the answer is, it depends, but I'm going to go into a little bit more depth. Basically, the way you can tell that there is no number one squash racket on the market, one way you can tell is that if you look at the top 10 players in the world, men and women, they almost all use different rackets. And you could argue that there are some, probably the most popular racket on the pros right now is this Carboflex model, but you know, men and women use this head racket. This is actually an older version, but you've seen this a lot. There's other rackets that you see quite a bit. But if you look at the top 10 on both sides, they all use different rackets. And I guarantee you, if there was a racket that was the best racket, clear advantage, then most people, then all the pros would be using it because they all want to win. And I guess maybe, you know, they want to get some sponsorship money or whatever, but honestly, I think they want to win more than anything. So I don't believe there really is a best racket out there. It's really about finding what works for you. So I'm just going to quickly go through a few things to think about when you're looking for a racket. So I mentioned two here, and I've got my own racket which needs to be restrung, but there's a few factors that go into picking a racket. One is the head shape. You've got a teardrop shape like this. You've got something in the middle which is teardrop-ish but has a slight opening here that has been called a hybrid racket, I've heard. And then this shape, which a stringer, a professional stringer, told me, because I always used to call this a closed frame, but he said no, it's an open frame because of the opening. Anyway, I call this traditional just to not get confused. But those are the three main head shapes. There are differences in the weighting, where the weight is in the racket, how heavy the overall racket is, the balance, which is obviously dependent on where the weight is in the racket. You've got differences in the frame construction beyond whether there's a bridge here in the throat. The bridge will give more stability to the frame. It's kind of more secure than a more open frame like this is. Maybe you like that feel of having it be a bit more controlled. This particular head racket, Laura Massaro uses this one, and you can, if you can picture her playing, she likes to get a racket up really early. It's a bit head heavier than, say, this Carboflex. She likes to get a racket up early and kind of let the racket come down through the ball, whereas this Carboflex, you know, Shorbaggy and others use this, maybe is a bit more evenly to headlight. He actually shaves off the bumper to make it even headlighter than it already is. You know, he might like to come through the air really quickly and attack that way. So it really depends on what your style is. But my point is, oh, and of course there's my racket, which Declan James also uses, but really it's my racket. And this is actually the same frame shape of the Nick Matthew racket. It's just a little bit heavier, but it's still pretty light and pretty headlight. I like that because in my particular case, I like to dig balls out of the back corner and try to straighten them out. And I have a little more trouble with that with a heavier racket. I like to be able to kind of flick it, and I feel a sense of satisfaction when I can get one of those going down the wall. And so really just try different rackets out and see what you like the best. You're probably going to want something that's 140 grams is about as high as I would go. All three, if you're talking about what's the best racket out there, if your budget dictates something a bit less expensive, you might end up with 140 or 145 or something like that, and that's fine. Especially if you're just getting into squash and you want to just get a racket to start with, just go for it. The other thing I'd say is that I guarantee you, if you gave Laura Massaro, if you took this away from her and you gave her this one, I guarantee you she would just destroy everyone who tried to challenge her, as long as you gave her a couple hours to practice with this, because it's not so much about the racket, it's just about picking one, going with it, and getting comfortable with it. And for some people, you know, as you get better and better, you're going to get particular about what you like. Maybe it's the balance that's key. I think for most people, actually, the balance is what really is what's really key. But you'll find what head shape you like, and you'll find out what you particularly enjoy the most. But basically, the bottom line is that there is no best racket on the market. So just pick one and go with it, and try your friends' rackets out when you can, and see if there's things that you prefer and that you want to try. And sometimes I've gone through this where I was using rackets like this. In fact, I was using this racket and it was head heavy and I was enjoying that. And then I wanted something lighter, so I switched to something that was teardrop and headlight just because I wanted to change, and that's okay too. So give them a shot. That's just I just want to give you guys a general answer to that question of what's the best racket out there. By the way, you're probably not going to find the best racket for under $100. I think as you get under that price point, the racket frames tend to be heavier, and I think that's generally not as good. So you're probably going to be spending at least $100, but you might find an older model on eBay or whatever that's the same frame as maybe the current one. It's just not the current cosmetic, and you might actually find something pretty inexpensive that you like. And I've heard this before, people will find a favorite racket and just try to buy that racket and search for it. When they can't find it, they're searching for it, trying to get more copies of it just because it works for them. And sometimes you find good deals that way too, and that's great. So anyway, that's my thoughts on the question of what's the best squash racket. All right, thanks.